Welcome to Crypto 101, a first principles jargon-free course on blockchain and its impact on financial services. In the previous lesson we learnt about the final step in the transactional workflow of Ethereum. In this lesson, we will complete the discussion. Specifically, we will learn about the proof-of-stake algorithm in Ethereum. We will learn about settlement finality and fork choice. We will conclude with a comparison of Bitcoin and Ethereum with respect to transaction fulfillment. We are currently in the process of learning how the transaction fulfillment step in Ethereum is different from Bitcoin. In the previous lesson, we covered Ethereum-specific nuances in the transaction fulfillment step. These were transaction fees sufficiency, block rewards, uncle blocks, block gas limit. In this lesson, we will cover proof of stake. Historically, the Ethereum blockchain used the proof-of-work method for mining blocks. This was similar to what was being used for Bitcoin, though some of the mathematics was different. In 2022, Ethereum migrated to the proof-of-stake method for arriving at consensus across nodes on the state of the blockchain. Next, we will learn how proof-of-stake works. In proof-of-stake, once transactions are authenticated, they enter the mempool. And just as in proof-of-work, a subset of transactions are confirmed into a block. However, the process by which this occurs is different. The rest of the lesson covers this process. A subset of nodes in Ethereum are called validators. A validator is chosen at random from this validator pool to mine the transactions into a block. This node is called the block proposer. Hence, we can say that the pool of validators is equivalent to miners in Bitcoin and the block proposer is equivalent to the winning miner. The block proposer forms the block. In Ethereum, this act is termed forging a block instead of the expression mining a block in Bitcoin. She also executes all the smart contracts contained within the block. This is where the process differs again from proof-of-work mining. A subset of validators from the validation pool is randomly chosen to vote on whether the block is valid. In Ethereum, the voting process is called attestation. The attestors verify the block. They also re-execute all smart contracts within the block to confirm that the output matches the block proposer. A block is considered valid if it garners the required votes. So far, we have noted that the block proposer and the voters are chosen randomly from a pool of validators. These validators are a subset of all nodes in the network. So, how are these validators chosen? Next, we will answer this question. To become a validator, an individual must do two things. First, deposit a specified minimal amount of Ether into an Ethereum account. This is called staking. In 2022, when Ethereum migrated to proof of stake, the minimum amount was 32 Ether. The individuals staking their Ether are called stakers. Stakers, thus, are analogous to miners in proof of work. Second, install all the software needed to propose blocks and vote on blocks. In Ethereum, the timeline is broken into slots and epochs. When Ethereum migrated to proof of stake in 2022, a slot was 6 seconds and an epoch was 32 slots, which is 6.4 minutes. These parameters are subject to change over time if majority of Ethereum users vote for changes. In each slot, a committee of validators from the pool of stakers are randomly selected. One of them is randomly selected to be the block proposer and the others have to attest. At the time Ethereum migrated to proof of stake in 2022, the number of members in a slot-level committee was 128, consisting of 1 proposer and 127 attestors. The reward of becoming a validator is the ability to earn Ether in the form of newly minted coins as well as transaction fees. Rewards are allocated once every epoch by adding to the staked balance of the validator. The staked balance of the validator increases over time as she earns more Ether. The share of reward allocated to an individual validator is derived from 2 factors. First, it has a direct relationship with the amount staked. The greater the amount staked balance of the validator, higher the reward. Second, the share of reward earned has an inverse relationship with the number of active validators in the epoch. The larger the number of active validators in an epoch, lower the award an individual receives. The proof-of-stake model also has penalty associated with it. The penalties relate to 2 circumstances. In the first scenario, a validator is not performing their duties. An example of such a situation would be of a validator who does not vote. This could occur because the validator's computer is shut off or disconnected from the internet. For such infractions, instead of being rewarded, Ether is deducted from their staked balance. In the second scenario, a validator is actively violating the rules of the Ethereum network. For instance, consider a block proposer who proposes 2 blocks in a slot. This is almost impossible to do accidentally. The process by which the staked Ether balance of a validator is deducted is called slashing. The amount deducted is dependent on the number of validators who are being slashed at the same time. This is called correlation penalty. The penalty is enforced by smart contracts. Penalties, like rewards, are allocated every epoch by reducing the staked balance of the offenders. There are two broad challenges in staking that people will encounter. First, becoming a node is not intuitive to non-technical users. Second, the minimum amount of cryptocurrency to be staked, as specified by the blockchain network, may be above the reach of many people. For non-technical users, staking through intermediaries is a simple way to earn the rewards of staking. Many end users deposit their Ether with an intermediary like a wallet provider or an exchange. This intermediary takes this pooled Ether and transfers it to the designated Ethereum account. The rewards are distributed to the intermediary, who is responsible for distributing it to its customers. In payments, settlement finality refers to the point beyond which the transfer of value arising from a payment cannot be reversed. Next, we will review examples. We can think of two scenarios. In the first scenario, settlement finality is not achieved even after transfer of value. For instance, a charge on a credit card can be disputed and reversed if the dispute is raised within a stipulated time period after the card was charged. Similarly, an individual can dispute a direct debit on her bank account within a specified time period of the charge hitting a bank account. The second scenario is when settlement finality and transfer of value occur simultaneously or near simultaneously. When making large payments, say the payment to purchase a home, sellers demand use of a payment method that has immediate settlement finality. For instance, wires cannot be reversed. In fiat money, the time period over which settlement finality occurs is clearly defined in the terms of service mandated by a central party. The central party could be a private operator like MasterCard that specifies the number of days within which a card chargeback is permissible. The central party may also be a regulator. In proof of work, the longest chain rule means that a block can be removed from the canonical chain, intentionally or maliciously, via a soft fork. We learned about this in earlier lessons. Hence, there is no clearly defined red line for settlement finality in proof of work. In proof of work, we learnt that the seller can wait for 4 confirmations of the parent block of the transaction before shipping goods. The probability of a payment being reversed from the longest chain rule decreases as the number of confirmations on top of the block increases. This is because the energy cost of outpacing other miners gets prohibitive, especially as the chain gets longer away from the transaction that needs to be eliminated. In proof of work, settlement finality is, thus, probabilistic. There is no defined line in the sand. In Ethereum's proof-of-stake model, an epoch becomes finalized after certain conditions are met. Typically, if all was operating as expected, if the current epoch was n, then we would expect all blocks up to and including n-2 epochs to be finalized. The algorithm that determines the finality of an epoch is referred to as the finality gadget, and its details are outside the scope of this course. As per Ethereum rules, if a group of stakers collude to make changes to finalized blocks, they must be in possession of at least 1/3 of the Ether staked by all stakers on the platform. Further, that amount, meaning 1/3, is slashed via a smart contract. This would amount to millions of dollars and would be economically catastrophic for the stakers. The high economic cost of trying to modify a finalized epoch effectively means that all transactions in the blocks of a finalized epoch become permanent and unalterable in the canonical chain. Comparing with proof of work, settlement finality in Ethereum's version of proof of stake is more well defined because the platform explicitly identifies and recognizes finalized blocks. Settlement finality in Bitcoin, on the other hand, is purely probabilistic, with the likelihood of settlement finality increasing with the number of confirmations. In this lesson and the previous lesson, we have been learning how some of the mechanics of the transaction fulfillment step in Ethereum is different from Bitcoin. We now know that transactions are confirmed into blocks by block proposers. They are validated by attestors. Both proposers and attestors are chosen from the staker pool. This brings us to the final step of blockchain creation. Once a node is forged and voted on by all the attestors, it is propagated to all nodes on the network. Each of the nodes then add the latest forged block to the blockchain. Consider the following situation. We are in epoch 2. In the first slot, proposer 1 forges block 2.1. It references the last block of the previous epoch as its parent. In the second slot, proposer 2 forges the second block and references block 2.1 as parent. In the third slot, proposer 3 forges the third block. However, because of latency, proposer 3 does not see the block 2.2. It thinks block 2.1 was parent. Attestors vote on block 2.3 as valid since they are voting on the content of the block and not its parentage. So now we have two blocks in the chain that are at the same height. Assume, from this point everything continues as normal and the fourth slot block is built on the third slot. As the blocks are being attested, they are propagated to all the nodes in the blockchain, just as in Bitcoin. Consider now the perspective of a node that is receiving the blocks. The blockchain it is building looks like this. It is expecting the block in the third slot, block 2.3, to reference block 2.2. But instead, it is now seeing an alternative blockchain. So now there is a fork, just as we saw in proof of mining. Next, we will see how this gets resolved. In our scenario, we earlier said that from the fourth slot of the current epoch, no further forks arose and all subsequent forks were built on the block formed in the third slot. So block 2.4 is built on block 2.3 as parent. In Bitcoin, the longest chain rule would mean that block 2.2 will disregarded from the canonical blockchain. In Ethereum, there is a similar concept. But instead of the longest chain, the nodes choose the chain with the highest number of attestations. Since the subsequent blocks are also to be formed on block 2.3, we can assume that block 2.2 will be removed from the canonical block. But it can be referenced as an uncle block. The fork choice in Ethereum is driven by an algorithm abbreviated as LMD Ghost. It stands for latest message driven greedy heaviest observed subtree. The highest vote rule that I mentioned earlier is a simplification of the actual algorithm, which is outside the scope of this course. One other thing to note is that once an epoch is finalized, there can be no further forks on it. This relates to the concept of settlement finality that we discussed earlier in the lesson. We can now compare proof of work and proof of stake. Note that we are comparing the implementations of proof of work and proof of stake at Bitcoin and Ethereum respectively. Other blockchain networks may implement these two frameworks in somewhat different ways. First, the similarities. Both are ways by which the nodes in the blockchain network arrive at consensus on a single set of records as the truth, without the need for a central record keeper. Transactions are confirmed into blocks in both. One block is considered to be the canonical block and soft forks are resolved through a fork choice rule. Next, we will summarize the difference. In proof of work, the canonical block is the one proposed by the miner who guessed the golden nonce. In proof of stake, the canonical block is the one proposed by a randomly selected block proposer and attested by a majority of randomly selected attestors. Both block proposers and attestors are selected from a universe of stakers. We can now distill a deeper distinction between proof of work and proof of stake. In both proof of work and proof of stake, the reward system is in the form of accumulation of the platform's native cryptocurrency. But the penalty system in proof of work is through expenses incurred on hardware and electricity. The work in proof of work is the computational work done by the computer. A miner launching a 51% attack on the Bitcoin network must spend high amounts of energy and invest in expensive hardware. In proof of stake, the penalty system is enforced through the risk of losing the amount staked in the platform. One of the reasons offered by Ethereum for migrating to proof of stake is that it makes the platform more decentralized. Since proof of work is highly energy intensive, over time, proof of work mining migrates to large companies, who can afford to deploy vast resources. Another reason offered is that it keeps the platform more secure from entities who want to attack the rules of the platform for economic gain. The migration of Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake is called the merge. The original Ethereum blockchain that started in 2015 is referred to as the mainnet, short for main network. In 2020, a new blockchain was created, called the Beacon Chain. Proof of stake was tested on the Beacon Chain. In 2022, all accounts and transaction history in the mainnet were merged with the Beacon Chain and the mainnet was retired. Hence, the use of the term merge. The merge had no impact on end users. Since we are learning about blockchain from a functional end user point of view, a technical comparison of the two approaches is beyond the scope of this course. All we need to note is that these are alternative approaches by which a blockchain network comes to consensus on which set of records represent the truth. The two approaches to consensus have been demonstrated in this course with the examples of Bitcoin and Ethereum respectively. However, the exact mechanism by which these are implemented would vary by the blockchain platform. In the final section of this lesson, we summarize how transaction fulfillment varies between Bitcoin and Ethereum. We will begin with confirmation. In the confirmation step, in Ethereum, a block is forged by a randomly selected validator from a pool of stakers. In Bitcoin, a block is mined by a miner who guesses the golden nonce. Next, we will compare the block validation step. In the block validation step, a committee of randomly selected validators from a pool of stakers verify the block. In Bitcoin, a block must be verified by a majority of nodes in the network. Finally, in blockchain formation, There are two main points of difference. First, any soft fork that occurs within non-finalized epochs are resolved by selecting the chain with the most votes. As I mentioned, the algorithm is a bit more complex than my simplification and is referred to as LMD ghost. In Bitcoin, fork choice is driven by the longest chain rule. Second, in Ethereum, transactions and blocks are finalized using an algorithm called finality gadget. Bitcoin follows a more probabilistic approach where increasing number of confirmations increase chances of transaction and block finality. In this lesson and the previous lesson, we completed learning how the transaction fulfillment step in Ethereum is different from Bitcoin. In the next lesson, we will do a wrap-up on cryptocurrencies, but before moving to the next lesson, review the summary of this one.